started and let everybody in to the program. We appreciate you being here. We have a great program lined up for you. Here we go. Evening, everyone. Whoa, I didn't mean to stop the music instantly, but welcome. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Greatest Generation Live for Thursday, March 19th. My name is Sean Hall. I'm the Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club. It's great to see you all here. I see some faces I haven't seen in a while. Burt Kennedy, it's good to see you. It's been a while. Jim, are you raising your hand or are you just stretching? Just stretching. Okay. All right. We have a couple teachers in the room, so if they see the hand go up, they're going to be alerted to your presence. Yes, it's great to see you all here for Greatest Generation Live. We're going to have a great conversation for you lined up tonight with Glenn Flickinger. Glenn, how are you doing this evening?
Doing great. Thanks so very much, Sean. How are you?
I'm doing well, and we will be checking back in with me in a little while. Please, everyone, put any questions you have tonight into the chat. And if you're new to us, welcome. Our mission is creating communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. And we do that on Monday nights with our VBC Live program. Tonight with our Greatest Generation Live program, we have a free quarterly magazine I could talk a bit about later, and our in-person breakfast, which we are finally getting back to out of the winter. So it's nice to be back to our bread and butter. No pun intended, but take it away, Glenn.
And Sean, we'll do a little station break right about 8 o'clock or so to remind people of some of these other events.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. And Sean, have you given me, do I have control here?
You are the co-pilot, so
I am
ready?
I am in control and I will prosecute. Now, welcome everybody. Glenn Flickinger here from VBC Greatest Generation Live. If there's any newbies on tonight, we appreciate you being on. Please let us know you're new. Send us an email and please come back. So every Thursday night, almost every Thursday night, we've been doing these Greatest Generation Live programs for 5-6 years now. And it's basically all subject World War II. I'm not a historian by education, just a World War II buff who, as my family would say, took a hobby and it's gone like crazy. So, so I've been very honored and very happy to be doing this now for 5-6 years. We interview a lot of World War II veterans, at least as we can find still. That's obviously a difficult task these days, but I'm actually in the process of talking to a 99-year-old World War II veteran, Navy veteran, in the Pacific, who joined the Navy when he was 16. Was in the Navy for a year and a half, served out in the Pacific in the last full year of the war in a very unusual and interesting circumstance, came home in July of 45 and turned 18. It's just an unbelievable story. Just unbelievable. Her name's Joe False, and I just fascinated by his story, and hopefully somewhere in the next few weeks we'll have him on for that program. But we also interview authors, experts on all kinds of topics World War II. And tonight we're deeply privileged, very happy to have author, journalist, professor, Brooke Kroeger. Brooke, please wave your hand and say hello.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. So nice to see you all, and so many men to hear about women. That's pretty good.
Yeah, most of us men kind of like women, I think. Don't you think? I've always liked the one I've been married to for 45 years. So, no, this is March is Women's History Month. So we're really pleased that this kind of came together at this time on this topic. Brooke and I have had a couple of nice conversations, and she sent me some information, which I just kind of got fascinated by it and dug into it and did a lot of my own research, just Google research, nothing dramatic. And we've come up with this presentation that Brooke's going to help us walk through and learn more about not only female war correspondents in World War II, but before that, female correspondents in general, which up until what, I guess Nellie Bly and Ira Tarbell. Up until then, there weren't any female correspondents. Is that more or
Not
less
true.
accurate?
Not
Not
true.
true.
Not true.
So who was the first notable female correspondent, bro?
Margaret Fuller, 1840.
1840. Okay. Okay. I'm not quite old enough to remember that. So that's interesting. And where was she reporting?
She was, when she became a reporter, and not so young when she became a reporter, it was for the New York Tribune, the biggest and most important paper in the country. She became the literary editor, quickly twisted that into writing about the underclass of New York. And after about a year and a half, said she'd like to have a new relationship, and she trots off to Europe and covers the Italian Revolution.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
she
Yeah.
was considered a major, major intellect, recognized by men and women, but mostly men, at a time when women were considered to be congenitally incapable of cataloging knowledge or understanding anything in a very deep way, and yet she surpassed most.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah. And between her and Nellie Bly, Ara Tarbell, who we're going to speak about, were there other notable female correspondents?
Yes, there were. There were in the 1850s and 60s, there were several women who were the highest earners in the country, earning more than men. Ha ha ha. And
I
which
like
is
that.
unusual. At that time, there was pay parity. That didn't end till about Nellie Bly's era. And they mostly were travel correspondents and Washington analysts, the political sphere.
Right.
And then we get to Nellie and her crew.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. We had, I think I mentioned to you, Lisa Rogak on. In fact, is Lisa on tonight, Todd? Do you see, or Sean, do you see that name, Lisa Rogak?
Let me take a look.
I thought she might be on. She gets our emails.
I do not see a Lisa.
But her book, Propaganda Girls, was women in World War II, specifically four, three women in the OSS who the names the general public would not recognize. And then, of course, the great Marlene Dietrich, which really blew my mind that Marlene Dietrich was quasi involved with the OSS and so forth. But she talked there about what those women had to overcome in terms of the bias against them by the male population and what they went through. They didn't get equal pay. They were much more underpaid relative to the responsibilities they had. So we've come a long way, even though maybe not far enough. We've come a long way.
True.
Yeah. Okay, let me pull up this get this started, and we'll get into the conversation with Brooke. And please, as always, have an active chat discussion going on in the background. Pose your questions. We'll pause a couple of times to let you ask questions and cover what might be in the chat. So just our cover note here. We've actually kind of expanded this quite a bit, Brooke, beyond just Helen Kirkpatrick.
I see that. Well, your good fortune is that I've written about all of this, so I'm on firm ground here.
There
Go
we
ahead.
go. Okay. She in herself is very interesting, but as I started doing the research based on what Brooke had sent me, I'm like, well, there's a lot of other interesting elements here, and let's pull them in. Okay. So we're going to start way back before World War II with Brooke's book, Undaunted. Brooke, what was this book about?
So this book covers the period from 1840, Margaret Fuller and Co., up to 2022, 2023, I guess, when I finished writing it. And it looks at not all women journalists, but it looks at the women journalists who did things that were considered exceptional in their time. In other words, girls who were doing boys' jobs. They're women who were doing things they were not expected to do and were doing them at the highest possible level. So it's about those women, the really exceptional stories in journalism. And it involves really hundreds of women that are talked about, but mostly the most interesting stories, not necessarily the best known, but those that illustrated what was happening in their, sort of 15 to 20-year era.
And this was kind of more or less your PhD thesis, is that? I know you didn't actually.
No. Nellie Bly was the thesis. That
Oh,
was
no,
written.
why?
The Nellie Bly biography came out in 1994. So it's in its what,
Okay.
nearly 40th anniversary. It was my first book. That's the one where I thought, oh, I see I can do this work. This one was a request of an editor at Knopf who felt like there was not a compendium history of women in journalism, and did, some nice person or two said I should be the person to write it. So he approached me. It wasn't my idea.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. I had them backwards. Yeah.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
But those are the bookends, 1994 to 2023. So there we are.
Yeah. And I didn't put
And there's 5 other books in between.
Yeah,
That's all.
very, very active. You've written more books than I've read.
No, that's not true.
So what I'd like to start with, just because it kind of is a Pittsburgh thing, at least Western
For sure.
Pennsylvania thing,
For
is
sure.
Nellie Bly. So remind us. Now, this is not for the Pittsburghers. Wasn't there a sportscaster named Nellie Bly or close to that? Anybody remember that name? Put it in the chat. So I always get that confused. Who is Nellie Bly? What
So-
was so interesting about her that you wrote a biography of her?
Well, many things are interesting about her and continue to be interesting because practically every third day I have a request to do something about Nellie Bly. Either it's to help a middle school student who's doing their History Day project, or it's this morning it was a British podcaster who's doing a whole program, the third one in the last month. So I mean, she captures people's imagination. She was an undereducated young woman from Armstrong County, a place called Cochran's Mills, named for her father, who had 15 children. She was the
Oh,
third of the second litter of 5, and had 2 ne'er-do-well brothers who were older than she, a mother who was kind of incapable of taking care of herself. Nellie has to leave school at 14. She went to what's now Indiana University of Pennsylvania. At that time, it was a normal school. She only did 1 semester before the money ran out. She comes back to Pittsburgh. She's 19 or 20. And there's an article in the Pittsburgh Dispatch saying what girls are good for. And it's a columnist, Erasmus Wilson, who's arguing that women should stay out of the workforce because they're taking jobs from young men. And Nellie writes back this screed, explaining that some young girls have to take care of their families, as she is doing. And the editor does something that never happens in journalism, I promise you. He sees the letter. He says, there's no grammar, there's no punctuation, but I see a spirit here. And he runs an ad asking Lonely Orphan Girl, as she signed herself, to come forward. And she does. And her name was Elizabeth Cochran. And he gives her the pen name Nellie Bly because someone was whistling the Stephen Foster song. Nellie Bly, bring the broom along. And so he gives her that name, spelling it differently, and the rest is history. So she is not so happy at the Dispatch because they're not giving her good assignments. She tries to write a series about the factory girls and what's happening to them who are working in these difficult factory conditions. And she has to be carried around by the management, which means she's not really getting the real story. And I think the editors are hesitant to really tell more. She wants to talk about child labor and things like that. And so I think that gives her the idea that she then executes 2 years later in New York. I'll skip a lot of this story because it's a pretty good story. And she is trying to get a job. No one will hire her. So she writes an article interviewing all the editors of New York about why they won't hire women, which is such a smart thing. It's published in the Dispatch. She's sending stories back to them, to keep herself afloat during this period of no job. And finally gets in the door of the New York World, which of course is Joseph Pulitzer's paper, the major exciting place to work in New York in 1887. And so what she learned from writing that story is that a journalist comes in with equipped with ideas is going to do better than the one that doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So she comes in with ideas. She has an idea to go
This was one of
steerage.
her ideas.
Yeah, well, her idea was to go steerage across the ocean as, in the cheapest class to see what that's like, because of course, immigrant hordes are coming, masses are coming across from Ireland and England now to, team on the Lower East Side,
Yeah.
and they think that's too risky and too expensive. And at that time, there were articles coming out of Blackwell's Island Insane Asylum for Women, said that there were abuses, that either there were abuses by nurses, mistreating patients, or doctors in other ways. There were just rumors. And how are you going to prove that? Obviously you couldn't go through the administration, right? So they cook up this idea, like all great ideas, it has many mothers. Nellie claims credit, Pulitzer's given credit, John Cockrell's given credit, who was the editor. It's hard to know, who really kicked it up. But for her to feign insanity and go undercover for 10 days in the women's asylum on what is now Roosevelt Island in the middle of the East River, that long sliver, and find out all she can. So she stays 10 days. She writes an amazing two-part series that runs over 2 Sundays in September and is instantly a household name. Instantly. I mean, it becomes so massive and so important that people are still asking me about it 180 years later. That's the way it is. So she's remarkable. And then week after week, she does more of the same thing, not quite as grand, but she goes to Albany and exposes a lobbyist who was bribing people. And she investigates the baby buying trade. She finds mesmerists who are fakers and exposes them. She goes to jail to see if women matrons are hurting prisoners. I mean, she just does every week after week after week for almost 2 years. And this culminates in 1889-90 with this lightning trip around the world in 72 days, which beats the record, the fictional record of Phileas Fogg, of course, which was around the world in 80 days, and just carves her place in history in 2.5 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Glenn, sorry to interrupt you. Can you press the start on the slideshow? I know it's showing, but we're seeing it sort of in a different view where it's not full screen.
Let me just stop share and start over again.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, my apologies.
Hi again.
Hi, yeah. Well, you were there all the time, just a matter of size. Okay. Having a little trouble with that, Sean. Give me
No
a minute.
worries.
So let me get you to answer another question. So the next woman we're going to cover, and when I get the slideshow up again, I'll show it to you.
Ida Tarbell.
Ida Tarbell. How did you come to know Ida Tarbell? Another Western Pennsylvania gift to the world.
So Nellie's work was, investigations in the form of what was called stunts or detective reporting. It's kind of, I am there. You can believe me. I saw this with my own eyes. We move forward just 5 or 6 years because Ida Tarbell is not much older than Nellie, nor is Ida B. Wells, who of course is from Tennessee, but also a very important figure in the progression of journalism towards serious data-driven reporting in an investigative mode. So Ida is very educated, unlike Nellie. Ida has been to the Sorbonne after, I think it's Allegheny College. Does that make sense? I believe that's her school. She was one of the few women at that time. And she then after that studied the Sorbonne. She wrote several big biographies. She's a real intellect. And working for McClure's, which was a big magazine in New York at that time, she's part of the group with Lincoln Steffens and other that were known as the Muckrakers. And she takes on Standard Oil. Why does she do that? Because her father was an oil man who was very hurt by the rise of the monopolies. And so she does just massive investigation, all in documentary work. And the series is huge. It runs in McClure's over quite a few weeks and is considered seminal. It really is very, very important. So she's a very important journalist. And some of her early work also looked at women in journalism in the same kind of way Nellie did, not interviewing editors, but interviewing women who had done the work to talk about, what the field was like. So she did all kinds of things, not just investigations, but that is what she is most known for. And the Standard Oil investigation stands as a journalistic paragon to this day.
And what was the publication she was writing for?
McClure's.
Of course. And that's the famous publication, was the man who founded it and ran it, editor, that was Adam McClure as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
And as I said, it's the home of the muckrakers, a
Yeah.
name given by Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah. And he employed not only Ida Tarbell, but other interesting.
Lincoln Steffens, and there was a crew of about four of them who were, not a quartet of journalists who were doing this sort of work.
Sort of the original investigative reporting, investigative journalism.
Well, I would say, Nellie gets credit for kind of opening the idea of the field in a jauntier way, a more popular way. And this group goes deep. So, what we would now call data-driven reporting really emanates from this work, this early work in McClure's.
Sean, have I got this looking better now?
Yes.
Yeah, it looks great.
Looks great.
Sorry for. So this is Titusville in the 1860s, as I recall.
Yeah.
Us-
She started out at Chautauqua magazine, which I think was also published nearby. Her family were Chautauquans and very involved with that movement.
So us Western Pennsylvanians all know that the oil industry started in Titusville. Those people in Texas seem to think they had it first, but they got it wrong.
Yeah,
We
no,
were
no, they're just wrong.
way before them.
They're just wrong.
If you've ever had the chance, I've taken, this is with my kids when they were like in junior high school or earlier, the railroad, the oil railroad. I'm sure some of our audience knows that, and I'm having vague memories of it now, that runs from Titusville to some other spot in what's called Oil Valley up that way. And it's a great history of all this. So, just to illustrate, my kids had absolutely no choice in learning history. That was never debated. So, okay. So these are the two women that got you started, let's say, in investigating or the whole subject of female correspondence.
Well, certainly Nellie.
No.
Certainly Nellie.
These are certainly two of the women, though, that deserve credit for sort of laying the foundation, if you will, for these World War II correspondents we're going to talk about next.
No, I wouldn't say.
You,
I wouldn't say that, Glenn.
No? What would be the proper way to think about that?
Well, I mean, think you could even think back to Margaret Fuller, who'd covered the Italian Revolution, and then in the just after Nellie and Ida and the other Ida, you have the women who covered the Spanish-American War. You had the women who covered the Cuban Revolution. You had women who were covering the revolution in the Philippines, at the Boxer Rebellion. I mean, women were doing this stuff all along. I think it's really important to say this, that they're quite forgotten. I just was screeding about this today, that everyone wants to be a groundbreaker. You know how often like a woman dies and you'll see in the newspaper, groundbreaker, trailblazer. Not true. Not true. Those trailblazers came years and years and years before.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to the history. Call them great, call them fantastic. And I can understand why they think they're trailblazers, because it was just as hard when they did it as it was 100 years before. I think that's where that comes from, thinking that I really am clearing the way. Instead, they're just clearing the underbrush. It's just a different approach. But that's my soapbox for today. Sorry.
It's an excellent, well stated and educated soapbox, as opposed to my off the hip thoughts and statements. So, okay. So I want to bring in, I see that our great friend Russell Freeberg is with us. Hello, Russell.
Good evening.
So for our audience sake and Brooke's sake, Russell is a World War II veteran. We just celebrated his 103rd birthday a few weeks ago.
Wow.
Had 3 or 4 other World War II veterans on for that. But beyond that, Brooke, I didn't think about this. Russell, my apologies. Russell is a noted journalist. Uh,
Oh.
Russell, give us the 30 seconds on your journalism background. I know it should take 30 minutes, but
Are we talking about Russell? I'd like to hear Russell's.
yeah, that's what I'm asking. Russell.
Okay, yeah.
Russell, you hearing us?
Yes, but that was 50 or 60 years ago.
No.
When I first started at the City News Bureau of Chicago, which was,
Oh, I interviewed there. I know that place.
and it was a co-op owned by the various papers to train reporters. And we covered police and the courts. And from there, I went to the Tribune to do feature writing for the neighborhood sections.
Great.
From there, I went to the financial section for 5 or 6 years, and then the city room, and then Washington, D.C., and then back to Chicago as managing editor for a time.
Oh, that's great.
But
What years were you managing editor?
70 and 71, part of 71, I resigned and went back to Virginia with my family. They were very unhappy in Chicago.
Oh. So I was in Chicago from 73 to 70, just to the end of 76.
And who did you work for?
I worked for United Press.
Okay. You knew Helen Thomas,
I sure did. Right across the street from the Tribune building. We were right across the street.
right? Yeah.
So fascinating. Russell also wrote a book about World War II, not his experiences, a book about oil in World War II with a co-author.
Interesting.
And Russell was there in DC as the bureau chief, right? In DC in the late 60s up till 70, right smack in the middle of the Nixon administration and all the goings on there.
I
Cool.
was in Washington for 10 years.
Yeah.
But I returned to Chicago in 71.
Yeah.
And who were you working for in Washington?
The Chicago Tribune.
Oh, also for the Tribune.
We had a staff of
Wow. Oh, you had a
10
big
or
staff.
10 people, 11 people.
Yeah. I knew some of those folks. That's great. I loved my years in Chicago. Unlike your family, I liked it.
Yeah, once a great city.
Great city.
I've been to Chicago several times, mostly back in the 90s and early 2000s. And all I can tell you is I love the deep dish pizza. It's just great.
Well, I think the sad thing now is that gorgeous wedding cake building where the Tribune was located and occupied the entire building. Am I right, Russell? Now they're in a room somewhere. Like the whole staff fits in a room like the size of a living room or something. I mean, it's
Talked to a freelancer who
sad.
does state and obits for the Tribune, and he said the staff is about 75 people.
Yeah, it's just shocking.
We
Completely.
had more than 400
Yeah, just
Yeah.
completely
when I
shocking.
worked. Yeah.
Well, listen, Russell, thank you as always for tuning in. And this time, not as one of our World War II experts, if you will, but as a journalist. And I'm sure once we get into the second and main part of this story on these female journalists in World War II, you'll find it very interesting because you were there at that time that they were reporting, and subsequently you're becoming a professional journalist. So thanks a lot for tuning in.
Talking about the women, I love to do investigative reporting. I thought that was the highest work you could do, is to bring down somebody that was corrupt. And
Absolutely. And I mean, we're off topic. We're way off topic, but this is fun stuff. The Tribune gave birth to several of the really important investigative stories. That task force that was operative in the 80s was fantastic. They won Pulitzer after Pulitzer. They brought down Van Solbrig Hospital. I wrote a book about undercover reporting, so I know a little about this. And then, of course, there was the Tavern. That was done by the Sun-Times, but it came out of a task force that came, like Pam Zeckman and crew came from the Tribune. So
I knew Pam well.
yeah, that was the Mirage was just one of the major investigative coups of all time. Fantastic. Yeah, Chicago did great stuff. They really did.
Which were the main newspapers in Chicago, obviously the Tribune, right? Which
And the Sun-Times, Daily
right.
News, those three. So
Which
Helen Kirkpatrick worked for the Daily News, the Chicago Daily News.
and was it the Daily News that was so anti-New Deal and FDR?
No, that was the Chicago Tribune.
That was the Tribune.
That would be the Tribune. The
Okay.
Tribune was the
That
conservative.
was Colonel McCormick.
Yeah, Colonel
He fought
McCormick.
with FDR day after day.
In fact, the Daily News was run by Frank Knox, Colonel
Right.
Frank Knox, who then becomes Secretary of the Navy under Roosevelt. So, they were not against the New Deal.
And ran against Roosevelt as a vice presidential candidate in 1940. Yeah, I think 1940. So anyway, we have gotten way off topic, but we'll come back to the main discussion until we can get off topic again soon, I'm sure. So before we jump 50, 60 years to World War II, from Ida Tarbell and Nellie Bly to World War II, are there questions from the audience or anything in the chat, Sean, that you think we should address?
Al Smith asked, I need to know which reporter you're talking about here, Al, but did she get any threats going after Standard Oil?
Oh, yeah, I think I can't really speak to that, but I'm sure there was plenty of backlash, of course.
There's a couple good books that include Ida Tarbell. I don't know if there's anything.
No, there are biographies. There's one, especially on this issue, by Steve Weinberg. And
Okay.
there's another one, a full biography by I'm dropping the name, but a really good woman reporter. There've been a couple of very good Ida Tarbell biographies.
Okay. That's so, Al, there's some more reading for you. I send Al a book every week, or he sends me a book every week. Anything else that we should address before moving on?
No, I think we're good to go.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I hope you all found that informative, even though it was a little off topic from what we had advertised. So let me see if I can do the share again without mucking things up. Looking
Looks
okay?
good. Yep, looks great.
So we move on to Helen. Helen is a very tall, very attractive woman, I would say. Pretty attractive woman.
I think she became attractive in her maturity.
Yeah.
Because I think she was so tall that, through college and high school, that was not really her métier, but it does become that as she gets to Geneva later.
Tall being like 5'10" for a woman back then, which was very tall.
So, and by some reports, 5'11". So it's, she was pretty tall. Her brother was 6'5".
Yeah.
So they were tall people.
Yeah.
They come from Rochester, the Rochester area, with also maternal roots in Wheeling, West Virginia. I think her mother had a lot of social aspirations. The family had lineage going back to the Revolutionary period and the Civil War. There were military people, there were politicians, local politicians, and others involved in good, serious civic work. And in Rochester, the family owned a grain machinery company that fell on hard times during the Civil War because, of course, they lost so many Southern clients. Guess why? And so they saw themselves as people of means and station. So she went to the master's school, except when money ran out, and then she'd go back to public school for a semester, and then on to Smith. Also, there was 1 year she had to go to the University of Rochester when her grandmother, who was paying the bills, died. And the brother went to Deerfield and then on to Princeton. And so, this is who they saw themselves as, though there was really no money. She marries a wealthy Chicagoan who is from a newspaper family that was very involved with the Hearst Empire. And that marriage is not fun. She had been to Geneva as a student at Smith and was taken with the formation of the League of Nations and was very excited about this. She spoke French. She had, things going for her. And so she signs up to lead a tour of students to Geneva and sends a telegram back to the husband that just says, not returning. And that is the end of the marriage.
Ultimate Dear John letter there.
I guess so. So she remains in Geneva for 2 years, trying to become a journalist, but also working for a research foundation that's connected to the Foreign Policy Association. And she really wants to be a journalist. So she's stringing. And what happens when you're a stringer? Russell can tell you, you don't get to sign anything. You're just sending in quotidian daily stories about what's happening at the League.
So define stringer for us non-journalists.
Okay, a stringer is somebody who's not on the payroll. They're paid by the piece, and they have no standing. And they basically work for an editor. If that editor leaves, they're busted. It kind of works like that. So it's not. I mean, she was living on Brussels sprouts and cottage cheese. That's what she was eating. There was not a lot of money. But in that world of the League of Nations, with people who are claiming to have jobs but seem to be spies, and just a slew of the most interesting folks, she is really taken with this world. And one of the people she meets is a Daily Telegraph reporter who's from he's very well born. His name is Victor Gordon Lennox. I think he's married, but I think she's kind of with him. And he convinces her to come to London, we're now in 1937, to help him found the Whitehall newsletter, which was this anti-fascist, very informed newsletter that circulated among diplomats and politicians and members of the House of Lords and members of the House of Commons. People of position read it. But it wasn't, published widely. You had to subscribe to it. And she gets her brother, who's just finishing school, college, to do a U.S. edition. So that's happening. And from there, in 1939, August, she's written a book. She's written 2 books, not great books, but one that is looking at Chamberlain and his fiasco, and then also looking at Londoners, in the face of the war, how they're adapting to war conditions. And the Daily News hires her, the Chicago Daily News, which has a terrific foreign service at this time. It's one of the really noted foreign services. Their reporters are winning Pulitzers. I mean, it's a really good service. And she gets hired. And what you're looking at now is a year later. So we're talking about August 1939. So she really wants to make a splash when she arrives. And who has just arrived in town? The former king and his wife have come back for a visit.
If I could just stop you for a second, okay?
Okay.
I just wanted to point out this picture of Victor Gordon Lennox. There's no tight association, at least with Winston Churchill. This was kind of a combination slide I did. I just love this photo. Couldn't find very many photos of him. He looks like he just stepped off the set of Downton Abbey, right? I mean, this is 1924 or 5 at his wedding. And just the look of him is pure British, pure English. If you have
Glenn, he has major access, and this is very helpful to Helen because she is with him a lot at weekends at Ditchley Park, at Cliveden. I mean, she is found her way into the cream of expat and British society. So she is running in circles where people know things.
Yeah. And that's the point I was trying to make with this slide. And
Yeah,
so, I'm sorry, before I interrupted you, Brooke, where were you going? It was, what were we going to talk about? Sorry,
God only knows.
uh,
Okay.
but there she is,
Yeah.
first female correspondent, and then she becomes a war correspondent as well.
Well, there's nothing else to be at that point because it's the war has begun. Exactly. So we start, we see her at Shakespeare Cliff watching the RAF flyers confront the Luftwaffe overhead. They're all there watching it, she and a number of correspondents. And then people like David Bruce. David Bruce at this time is the head of the Red Cross in England. However, he's really also with the COI, which of course is the coordinator of information, which is then becomes the OSS very quickly, about a year or so later. And I think he comes as the Red Cross to sort of find his way around. He's hanging out with journalists a lot, and Helen being one of them. And all the great memoirs of this period, everyone talks about that period on the cliff and how Helen really led it and was never afraid. So you get that sense of her. Of course, she's still a woman. And remember, women reporters, though they carried rank and wore uniforms, of course, they had to have their own uniforms made at their own expense, of course, um, are not allowed near the front. They can't go further forward than the WACs or the nurses. They're not allowed to, period. This is, some misplaced chivalry, but that exists. So naturally, within the staff of the Daily News, she's the low man on the totem pole. Bill Stoneman is the big reporter, and then they have a couple of others. She's always at headquarters. She's the one who's doing that daily story that's coming out day after day. But in addition to that, because of who she is associated with and the access she has and the cabinet ministers she knows and etc., she is doing scoop after scoop after scoop. So if we go back to the War and the Woman page at the end of her first year, oh, I know what I was getting ready to say, that she gets to interview the king, the former
Oh,
king,
yeah.
which was a huge scoop to have, as your first story coming into a foreign assignment. It was pretty great. Not this one, but the War and the Woman one, the ad. Can we go to that one? That one, yes. So a year in, the Daily News runs this as almost a full page to talk about Helen and what she is doing for them. And in this, I'm not going to read it, but it explains that half the major, full line headlines you're seeing across the front page are stories that she has given them that they cannot attribute to her because she can't give up her sourcing, and her name would do that. So she just has these extraordinary scoops. Um, it says it this way: it is significant that not once, but time and time again, her scoops have been splashed across 8 columns, front page headlines, without a hint of credit to the razor-edged intelligence that rifled them home. Ta-da! I mean, she's talked about in these terms. Later on, there'll be stories that are just called headlined "Our Helen," and some incredible scoop she gets. At a certain point, from a weekend at Ditchley, she picks up information about Belgium, and Belgium saying that they think they're going to be invaded first, and publishes it. And Winston Churchill goes just mad and says, "Get this woman out of England. She cannot be, haunting around, swanning around country homes, picking up information and then telling the world." And then he is held back by some of his consigliere who say, "No, no, 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 she's a really important reporter, leave her alone." So she had that kind of influence. And later in the war, we find her with Eisenhower or Churchill playing bridge, and they've all given her nicknames, and she's kind of a pet as well.
Two other people that at high levels that she knew quite well.
Well, Frank Knox was her boss. He's the publisher of her paper. And of course, then he becomes the Secretary of the Navy. And a funny story about that is one of her, family jobs is to try to get her brother placed in a good job, a good position, I think is a better way to put it, after he graduates Princeton. And so first she gets him a position with Kermit Roosevelt tutoring his son who's trying to get into Groton, and and he needs clothes, so she needs to find him a tux. He's 6'5". And so he says in his memoir that she got it from the embassy, and he thought it came from Joseph Kennedy, of course, who was the ambassador at the time. And I would say to you, Joseph Kennedy was 6 feet. This kid is 6'5". I think maybe not. Maybe it was somebody else's tux. But anyway, she's trying to position him, and he applies for a naval commission and is denied because he has red-green color blindness. So they reject him. She tells this to Bill Stoneman. This is really a story about how their world works. She tells this to Bill Stoneman, just, chatting, I suppose. Bill Stoneman goes back to Chicago. This is before, oh yeah, he goes to Washington. He meets with Knox, of course, who's his publisher. This is typical. You're a foreign correspondent, you go meet with the publisher when you're home. I mean, it's normal. And tells the story. The next thing we know, little Lyman is in the office of Frank Knox, the Secretary of the Navy, being offered the rescinded post. And that's how this happens. That's how the world worked. So I think that story is just emblematic of how she was able to move in the world.
So while we're on Lyman, this is the only picture I could find of him.
Me too.
So it sort of proves he was a spook, right? There's no photos on him. We have to go to the deep dark web to find.
After the OSS, he goes on to become, over time, the number 3 man in the CIA. And some say he would have been the head had he not been stricken with polio and was confined to a wheelchair from about 1952 on. But the next year traveled to Africa for 6 months. I mean, he was just remarkable.
But during World War II, he's posted where? To Geneva? Is that right?
Well, he's first in London with the OSS, and then he's in Europe in the European theater. He's seconded to, I think it's the Third Army or the First Army. He gets involved with Patton. I mean, they're just terrific stories about him. He was able, just from memory, to recite, the previous day's battles all over the continent in, just in a complete clipped litany. He had some real powers, and he also was very good at predicting like where the Russian army was going to be next and how they were going to get there. I mean, he was just very good at those sorts of logistics.
So do we know how much influence his position in the OSS had with his sister and helping his sister with all these fantastic stories?
Well, in the story, you see that there are moments where they are in the same place. Like she tells a story that once she was assigned to be on a glider mission with 5 other reporters, all the others all being men, and Lyman was called Kirk, knew about it and got her taken off the list, and they were all captured. So she was pretty glad he had done that, even though she was furious with him. So we see things like that. And then she will mention that sometimes she would do reporting from, with OSS people because they had access to, German installations where there was stuff to find out. So how was she getting that? I would get with a little help from her brother.
Sure.
So, you would see that, or seeing that that's a way in, that's a way to work. So she had figured that out.
Let me see if this is the accurate picture to paint. She's, because of her sort of aristocratic background and upbringing and schooling and her, intersection with all these well-known high society, well-placed people, she ingratiates herself with all these people. And that's kind of the source for all her stories.
Often, I mean, not all her stories, because obviously she's also doing, Schaeff stories and things like that. She does all that. And she reports on England, in duress. I mean, she, just the civilian stories too. She reports lots of stuff. But what do I want to say about that? That's really interesting. She clearly has the ear, and I think people want to give her ear because she is sending information back that they want to get back. There's a lot of reciprocity in the way that's unfolding. She believes in intelligence. She believes in gathering information and sharing it. She often writes long memos that nobody wants because she feels that she's learned things that will be helpful. The Americans could not be less interested. They like to do their own research, but the Brits and the French really liked hearing what she had to say. So she's ingratiated there. And again, she had this entree, which was special. Now, Virginia Coles had the same entree, but Coles, spelled Cowles, is really a Boston Brahmin. I mean, really blue book, as opposed to Helen, who is not. So Virginia Coles hears all the same stuff, but she doesn't tell out of school. So there's a real difference. I mean, Helen is just kind of all reporter and a little bit too close to the spy story for my taste, but nonetheless very effective. I mean, why I got drawn to her story, she's only mentioned briefly in Undaunted, because when I was trying to understand why she won the U.S. Medal of Freedom, the only woman to win it out of 160 accredited reporters, included people like Martha Gellhorn and Lee Miller and uh, you know, just so many great reporters that also were doing fantastic work. Why her? Why her? And it just smelled a little spooky to me. I just felt a little uncomfortable with it. So I didn't do a lot with her. And then after the book was published is when I went to work on the why. And, I got I think about 92% of the way. I feel like she was intelligence adjacent, is what I would say. She was interested in it. She wanted to be helpful. It's wartime. You help your side. She felt she was best positioned to do it from where she was. While Bill Donovan tried to recruit her for the OSS, she said, no, I'm better off where I am. I can do more work for where I am. Frank Knox said, you can do more work for the war from where you are. So, she made those choices. And yet at the same time, she would call David Gray, who was the minister plenipotentiary, the US to Ireland, and say, have you got use for me? So I think she was a little fence sitting from her in this regard.
This is the Medal of Freedom in 1944. It's not what it looks like today, but I did some research and this is what it looked like in 1944. So again, there were 19 war correspondents given the Medal of Honor by the United States, but she was the only female war correspondent.
So I was able to find the nomination process, that it's hidden in the archives. So I have all those names, and you can see that there's certain people like Ernest Hemingway who get crossed off really quickly because people were mad at him for various things or whatever. And I don't think he did great war reporting in this instance, but nonetheless. And her name doesn't come up till the very, very end, and somebody adds it in pencil with this kind of vague citation. They all have a little bit vague citations, which, also raises a question like, why are they so vague? And she's vague about it. She's very offhanded, kind of, diminishes it. Don't really know why. You'd have to find it in my records at Smith. She just passes it off this way. There's nothing in the records of Smith. I've been there. It's just interesting and raised more questions than it answered for me.
I would think she deserved it, but
but others did. Others did. Why her?
Others did as well.
Yeah.
So that brings up that suspicion of connections at very high places and what favors were done.
The women were not particularly valued. You have to remember that they just weren't valued. I mean, they really were considered half a nuisance.
Yeah.
So she surpassed that. She was able to move beyond that in a very cool way.
So
questionable.
I'd like to finish, if we could, on the Helen part of this, with the story of her being at Notre Dame Cathedral in August of 1944 and seeing and reporting on the attempted assassination of Charles de Gaulle and a couple of other leading French general, Leclerc, and I think somebody else. And Sean, you got to help me because I know you took high school French at least. What was the fellow's name who attempted to assassinate de Gaulle?
I'm going to butcher this, but Jean-Bastien Thierry.
what was his background again, Sean? I asked Sean to look into this for me just before we started.
Oh, his background. Hold on
Was
a
he a
second.
military officer?
He, yes, he was a French Air Force lieutenant colonel.
Yeah, yeah. And he was hung for the attempted assassination.
Executed, firing squad.
Firing squad. Yeah, yeah.
So she enters France, with the battalions liberating Paris, which was pretty exciting. And then they go to Notre Dame for a ceremony for the fallen resistance fighters, for their families. They are all gathered at the cathedral, and this assassination attempt takes place. Everybody else is with Ernest Hemingway at the Ritz opening the hotel with champagne, and she decides she's covering the story, so she goes to Notre Dame, and then hanging on a fence, as she describes it, she's hanging on the grate of a fence and witnesses this attempted assassination. And she could tell that something different had happened because a different set of priests come forward, and that, isn't normal. So something else was happening, and the music stops, and she writes this extraordinary story. And it's the second time in her career that's, she's a witness to something extraordinary that nobody else sees. Back in Geneva, where she's just a stringer, a Czech journalist kills himself in the League of Nations hall because they won't take up the question of Palestine. He was Jewish, and he shoots himself. She's the only person to witness it, doesn't have an outlet because she's just a stringer. And so that's the first reporting I see with her name from Geneva, because New York Times and other reporters are quoting her for having witnessed that. So she witnessed two things like that just by being there, which is, of course, as Russell will tell you, the best thing a reporter can do.
Fascinating story, and there's so much more we could go into. So let's stop again here and ask for questions from the audience. Let me ask Russell the first question and ask him to comment. Let me make sure you're unmuted. You are. Russell, did you ever have a correspondent like this that worked for you? Would this be somebody you'd like to have on your staff?
Yeah, you certainly would.
I imagine.
So can I say something? So Russell, nobody would hire her after the Daily News failed. They closed down the Foreign Service by about 45. And she and a bunch of her colleagues went to the Post, the New York Post, which they absolutely despised. So she left very quickly. She didn't even stay 8 months, and then could not get another job in journalist. She had to go to VOA. No one would hire her.
But she's got I mean, look, in my professional career, like a lot of people on this broadcast, on this Zoomcast, I've hired and fired a lot of people. Boy, I wish I'd have run across more Brooke Kroegers in my profession, right? Obviously go-getter, obviously hungry, obviously wanted to overcome whatever objections there were to her. I mean, wow, what a person. So, what's in the chat, Sean? I saw this from Al Smith. How about if we unmute Al Smith and ask him to ask that question?
Sure. Let me find Al real quick here. There he is. Al, go ahead and unmute. We should be able to hear you, Al.
Okay. I was just curious. Edward R. Murrow, as a war correspondent during World War II, he was also a recipient of the Medal of Freedom. Did she and he ever cross paths?
Sure, of course, because they did in London, yes. But I didn't have a voice for radio, so no. And the women that did, like, what's her name, Myron Breckinridge, and Pauline Frederick, who really is the first lady of television, he had no use for once they got back to the States. There were no women on his team when he went back. Tells you something. He told Pauline Frederick that, her voice wasn't good for a broadcast. And she had a really brilliant career. I see my friend Franny Zorn, who worked for Newsweek back in the day. Hi, Franny. You're so sweet to be here.
I'll unmute.
Franny will ask you to unmute.
No, she doesn't.
No? Okay.
Are there other questions that anybody would like to pose or observations?
I'll pop out to the gallery view here if anybody wants to wave their hand. Nothing else in the chat. I think we're good to go there, Glenn.
Okay. Okay, let's take that station break, Sean, to tell people about what we've got coming up in the next week or so.
Absolutely. Let me get my PowerPoint up here. Yeah, we have some great stuff coming up because like I said, we're getting back to our in-person breakfast, which is why Todd will not be, he's not on tonight because he is currently traveling out to the eastern part of the state to hold some breakfasts over there in the Philadelphia, Harrisburg, New Jersey area. But to start off, we have a free quarterly magazine for those of you who may be joining us for the first time. Did I say free? Yes, I said free. We can send this to your mailing address. It's filled about 30 to 35 pages of veteran stories and topics that we come across. And it is edited by one of a wonderful, wonderful person, Daria Summers. She really puts her heart and soul into this. So if you don't get it, it's just because we don't have your address. So please send that to us and we'll make sure you get one in the mail. We have on Monday night, Silas Cerna. I believe that's how I pronounce her name. Hopefully I'm not mispronouncing it, but she will be joining us as a women veterans advocate and a Marine Corps veteran. So she'll be joining us on Monday night. It has a great story to tell. And Todd will be on back with us for that conversation. We will be doing a film screening next Thursday night, March 26th. This is with Glenn. This is a registration only event. So please go to our website, go to the events, go to online events, and then there you will be able to find the registration if you don't get our e-blasts because we'd love to have you. Glenn, do you want to give us a preview of next Thursday?
No, not really. Everybody knows the subject, I think, pretty well. This came from a conversation, I think one of the open conversations a couple of months ago, where several of our Vietnam vets were talking about seeing or just missing seeing Bob Hope, and those that saw him, how much they loved him. I just reminded me to go back and find this man is Tim Gray from the World War II Foundation. He makes all these documentaries on World War II subjects and veterans of World War II. He's got a library of 40 or 50 of these that are just, you could spend a month just looking at them. And so I reached out to him and he said, yeah, let's do Bob Hope. So that's the only reasoning behind it. A fun night, rather than a night full of talking about death and destruction and war. This is a little bit more of a fun night.
Excellent. So make sure you register, everyone. We'll see you there on next Thursday, next Thursday night. And then the following Monday, the Shoeshine Boys of Saigon conversation with Dick Hughes. We're looking forward to that conversation as well as our in-person breakfast. This is the first one in Pittsburgh. So we will be at the Heinz History Center on Sunday, March 29th. That'll be a 2 p.m. start. Expect some pretty much some snacks and drinks and our normal wonderful storytelling programming. So hope to see you all there at Heinz History Center in the Strip. So thank you, Glenn.
Okay, yeah. One question in the chat that just came up. Let's talk about that one because it applies to both women, I think. Carol Popchak. Carol, where are you?
Carol, I'll ask you to unmute if you'd like.
Hi, I'm here.
There you go, Carol.
Hi, Carol. Thanks for
being on. You can't see me, but I'm here.
Your question.
The question I posed was, I was struck by Brooke's comment about women having difficulty getting jobs in their chosen profession after the war. And I think this wasn't just in journalism. There was a general attitude of, well, now the boys are coming home and they're the ones that need the jobs. So gals, go back to the kitchen and, raising the kids. Brooke, do you think that is partially what explains the plight of the women journalists?
Well, I think in her case, the kind of work she had done, 9 times more men had done and were looking for jobs home afterwards. So all of the men in her group at the Chicago Daily News all found work. Some of them found it also in sort of quasi-governmental situations, not journalism. Maybe they were, done. but others did find it. So I think there's definitely truth in what you're saying. That happened after World War I as well, with so many gains made even then, and lost to the point that when the 1970s came, there was like a collective amnesia, not remembering how far women had come since the vote, and having to do the same thing all over again. I remember in writing Nellie, I was really struck by these high-level economic papers about if it made more sense to hire childcare or go to work, as the subject of 1899.
Wow.
And it was like, whoa, they were already talking about that. Why are we talking about this in 1978? Like, why is this a subject again? Because we just forgot. And I think the forgot, I figured out writing the biography of Fannie Hurst. It really came through that period of the two wars and the Depression in between, where women were pretty much back where they were, except in cases where they had to work, and then not in jobs they'd like to have, unless they were someone like Margaret Fuller, someone, who just surpassed expectations in a way that people took notice and didn't blink.
Yeah.
I think women, like I always like to say, the A++ women never had a problem ever. And the A women had the problem because they were beat out by the B- men. That's kind of how it was.
I'd highly suggest the book by David Nassau, Wounded Generation.
Oh, he's a wonderful historian, really wonderful.
We've had David on twice about that book.
Oh, good for you.
So,
He's a friend of mine. He's fabulous, really fabulous.
we loved him, and we're going to have him on some more as well. But in that book, he covers exactly the question that it was posed. So let's jump here. Carol, thank you very much. Let's jump to the next topic, which is another female correspondent, Anne Stringer, World War II correspondent, but a very different story, but still a fascinating story. So let me, seeing this okay, everybody?
Yeah. So unlike Helen, Anne is unknown. She was a young Texan, married to another Texan, and they got hired by United Press in Dallas. And then they kind of were a team. He was a terrific reporter. She was too. And then they went to Columbus, to New York, and then UP sent them to Buenos Aires just as Perón came to power during the military coup. So she had military experience. We have to remember a lot of the women who were writing during World War II, except the very exceptional ones, were doing civilian work, but they didn't have any military training. They weren't really prepared to go to battle. So we have to say that. It wasn't like they were kept from it. They were kept from it because they weren't trained to do it. People like Homer Biggert, who was writing for the Herald Tribune and considered the greatest, war correspondent of the period. Well, they sent him to Canada to train. I mean, they prepared the men to go. Women were not prepared. So in Anne's case, she had actually had this experience in Buenos Aires and working for UPI, or UP at the time. I can tell you that you do everything and you learn to do everything because there aren't that many people to do it, and you're expected to do it better than the people who have 5 more people than you do doing it. So anyway, she and her husband are getting bored in Buenos Aires. They really want to get to the front. They want to get to Europe. And UP is moving too slowly. So the husband, William, gets Reuters to send him with the promise that Anne can follow. Why can Anne not go when he goes? Because the military was making it very, very difficult for women to get credentialed. They kept holding it up. And then there would be episodes with women who went abroad, especially in, I believe it was in Algiers, the AP reporter and another one that, were infuriating Wes Gallagher, who was the AP bureau chief, and then he's writing back nasty notes, and that puts more roadblocks on the other women who are trying to follow. Anyway, so she's just about ready to leave when she gets the note that her husband has been killed.
Hmm. What year would this have been, Brooke?
This is 44.
44.
Yeah, it's September 44, the day she's scheduled to leave, that on August 17th, which would have been, a couple of weeks before, he was traveling with an Acme photographer named Andy Lopez and an Army driver, Private Lawrence Sabin. They were advancing with the First Army. They stopped near Dreux, which is 60 miles from Paris, and they slowed down to inspect a terrible explosion when Bill gets hit by an anti-aircraft gun that was pointed at the Jeep. So he dies in an instant. She is, of course, completely undone. But within a month, she's just determined to go. And UP convinces her to come back, not to go with Reuters. And so they send her. And who is she working for in Europe? She's very young, 10 years younger than Helen. And she's working for Harrison Salisbury, who is the UP foreign editor at the time. Of course, he goes on to be a great Times figure, New York Times figure, and Walter Cronkite, who is the London bureau chief and European editor, a job I had, 50 years later. But anyway, Salisbury would talk about Anne as a two-fisted competitor, the best man on the staff, all reporter, not girl reporter, straight reporter, which was wonderful. And then they would comment on her beauty, of course. And Cronkite would say very similar things about her, also commenting on how beautiful she was. So she gets a lot of credit for coverage of Hewlett Castle with the Ninth Army as they cross the Roar. She works with two other reporters. Do you want to show that picture?
Yeah, and if I could just make one observation and two comment.
Please.
This photo, before I get accused of some sort of AI thing, this is not Anne Stringer.
Yeah, it's not.
Impossible to find too many photos of her, but I was researching female foreign correspondents. I don't even know who this is. I just love the way this photo is composed. It just, the cigarette, the tin cup, the drinking cup hanging out, the soldier with the helmet on. I just thought it was a great World War II photo. So, okay. And just Anne, as I jump to this next photo. So Anne Stringer in the middle there, where she's actually more mature. Okay. You'll see some current pictures of her in World War II in a minute. What's the difference between Helen and Anne, not only Anne, but these three female reporters who we're going to identify?
Well, first of all, they're all forbidden to go to the front, and they all go, and they kind of get the blind eye pass from the military because they're equipped to do the work. They dig their own foxholes. They don't get in the way of the men, which is, I think, one of the reasons they wanted to keep women away. They don't worry about the fact that they are not allowed in the latrines. They don't worry about the fact that they cannot attend the makeshift press conferences. They just do their job, and they're expected to. So Iris Carpenter is British, but writing for the Boston Globe, and Lee Carson is writing for INS, which was International News Service that by 1958 merges with United Press to become UPI. And they were Newsweek would talk about them as a redhead, a blonde, and a brunette, always these diminutives for women that don't help anybody, but happen all the time. Less now, but did for a long time. And so they just ignored SHAEF policy and they just go up the Rhine. And Anne will say later, she wrote two short memoirs that are really kind of worth reading, but not well published, so they're hard to find. They were tenacious competitors, kept their own counsel, didn't share stories, but when it came to confronting the military, they acted as one. They had to. They needed to protect each other. Some of the great things Anne did, she writes a great story from Nordhausen concentration camp, witnessing the prisoners half dead, the rest dying, is how she describes it. 10 days later, she's at Buchenwald, and this is her lead. The lampshade was made from the skin from a man's chest.
Ugh.
That's the lead on her story. So you get a picture of, who she was. And then days later, she gets wind of the fact that the Russians and the Americans are going to link up at Torgau. And she decides that this is she in the middle, that she is going to be there by hook or by crook, and she is going to have the exclusive on that story. She's going to beat everybody. For a wire service reporter, this is very, very important because beats can be measured in minutes or seconds. And if they're days or hours, it's so major you can't imagine. It's just cause for celebration throughout the entire network. So she goes, and she goes by plane with a photographer. And the reporter who was the pool reporter thought he was going to have the exclusive. He's not worried about her showing up. I mean, he's not really worried because he knows that she's going to have to pass through the censor as he is, and he's going to be the one who gets to be first no matter what. Only that is not what happens. So she goes to the celebration. They're, drinking wood alcohol and other things, and then she's
Here in the middle of
and downing raw eggs and whatever the Russians do, and it's completely adorable. And she leaves early and gets on the what is it, an L-12, the plane, and it can't get all the way to Paris. She's not going to the censor of this army. She is going back to Paris to the Scribe Hotel to file her story, which of course the other reporter does not know. And the plane can't go the distance, but they see a C-47 coming to a landing part way, so they follow it down, and she gets out and asks these two Americans if they will take her to Paris. She said, I have to file my story on the link up of the Russians and the Americans. And one of them says, yeah, and I'm Roosevelt and you're Stalin, like they just don't believe her at all. So she sits down under the wing of the plane and starts typing, and then says, and how do you spell your name? And what's your hometown? And you can see that she's putting it in the story. And they immediately get on the plane and take her to Paris. And she makes her way hitchhiking to the Scribe. She files, she's, it's the biggest story since D-Day. It was such a big deal, and all hers. And then, of course, UP arranged for her to do a broadcast version, which her mother hears, and back in Eastland, Texas, it's all pretty wonderful. So that's the wonder of Anne Stringer.
Yeah. Another incredibly.
Yeah, a different kind of reporter. And then she goes on and she's working for Cronkite at Nuremberg.
Yep.
And he reports that, of course, for the wire service, you have to cover the daily. You have to cover what happened in the courtroom today. But the real stories were in the files of both the Germans and the Allies. That's where the stories were. You had to have the sources to know who to ask and where to go and what documents you needed to see, etc., which she was completely masterful at. So she is doing this day after day after day, drowning the AP, which is, of course, every UP reporter's dream all the time. And then the story fades off the front page. It's getting to be not so interesting anymore. So, of course, she wants to be reassigned. But Cronkite does not want to reassign her. He wants her. But as he says, this is a battle I did not win.
Yeah, yeah. So how long is she there at Nuremberg? Is she just for the initial first big trial?
Oh no, throughout most of it. But then, as I said, as the story faded in interest, she moves on.
Yeah.
And then she remarries, and I don't think very happily, and things don't go quite so well after the war.
Yeah, yeah. So another fascinating female war correspondent lost to history.
Yeah, see, Helen Kirkpatrick is not lost, but
No.
Anne Stringer pretty much is.
Yeah.
And she's one of my favorite stories. It's probably because she's a unipresser, but I really like her.
And I'll just show this little booklet. I didn't take a photo of it to put on the internet, but this is the little, I don't know what you call this, a storylet, the story of Anne Stringer by Brooke. That is available, I imagine, online if you want to look this up.
I think it's called a chapter book, a chap book.
A chapter book?
A chap book. You call it a
book.
chap book. Yeah.
Interesting.
By Thornwillow Press.
Okay. And the other thing I neglected to do, and Sean, I'm going to ask if you would do this. all this started with an article that somebody sent me, one of our members. I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was. Might have been Ben. Ben sends me lots of articles, but that Brooke published about Helen Kirkpatrick called, is it called The Go-Between?
The go-between. That was, that was American Scholar's title for it. I thought it was a good one because she was a go-between. That is kind of what she did.
Yeah.
It's not considered cricket in journalism to do a lot what she did. I mean, it would be, you would never want to be accused of being half a spy. You just wouldn't ever.
Hmm.
It's not in the bylaws. So she took some liberties that, I kept thinking, well, in the middle of the war, what would you do? The people were so allied against the fascists. It just seemed so terribly important.
Yeah. Yeah.
To defeat it. So I don't know. Hard to judge.
Sean posted the wonderful article that Brooke wrote, The Go-Between, with the American Scholar, in the chat. So if you'd like to read that, it's a great read. It's what got me so interested in, one, getting Brooke to come on the program, and two, once we engaged, I started just, researching and reading lightly on the internet. And there's just, you could talk about this topic for another full program and still not exhaust it all. So,
and again, there were 160 accredited women. And if you consider what happened to Martha Gellhorn when she stowed away on a nurse's ship to D-Day, beating Ernest Hemingway, who had the credentials she should have gotten from Collier's, but they gave it to him, even though she'd been writing for them for years by then. She lost her accreditation. She lost everything. I mean, like, for the rest of the war, she operated with no authorization whatsoever.
okay, we've got 10 minutes or so. Questions from the audience? Sean, I just looked at the chat. I didn't see anything. How about Russell Freeberg? Russell, what do you think of all this? These Rhine maidens were there on the Rhine with you, except I doubt that you ran into them very often.
I never ran into a war correspondent during World War II. I knew many of them after the war. They were great reporters, from what how Brooke describes them. I would think any paper would want them on their staff. But, I'm familiar with them letting women go. When I went to work for the City News Bureau in Chicago, they had all women correspondents during the war, and they let them all go and hired men.
So it's interesting. We see this a lot after World War I, where women got jobs during the war, same way, in newsrooms, and some were qualified and remained, and most weren't. And either they went off and got married, which is, was the expectation, of course, or they just faded away because they simply weren't really up to the job. Both things happened.
I'll bring up that last year we had Elizabeth Becker on, and her book, You Don't Belong Here.
Vietnam, yeah.
Yep, and I just posted that. If people don't remember that conversation, this is a good way. Check out that conversation from last year, everyone, if you sort of see the evolution of this, where we've been talking tonight.
Who you should have next is the woman who's just written the biography of Marguerite Higgins, who's the only woman to win the Pulitzer for war reporting, the first in 1951 for Korea.
Yeah.
She was the only woman covering that conflict.
That's a great one, Glenn. It would be a great bridge between World War II and our Vietnam coverage.
Yeah,
and she is really a character. I mean, really a character. So that would be a fun one. And the woman who did the book is great. So you'd enjoy
I
her.
knew Maggie Higgins briefly, or not briefly, but
In Washington?
in Washington, yeah.
She is what you call a real piece of work.
Yeah, she was.
She really was.
Can you put me in touch with that author, Brooke?
I could do that.
Yeah, we'll cover that offline.
If you send me a note to remind me.
I will.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I'd like to ask Russell, unless there's questions from the audience.
We
I'd
could
like to
go.
ask Russell another question.
Go ahead, Glenn.
So Russell, I've read many of the memoirs and the biographies of World War II correspondents, right? But you knew some of these people, and you were in World War II, and you're a journalist. So, of the whole, I know there's a lot of names out there, but what would be two or three World War II correspondents that you would like to mention as people that you really thought were good at what they did?
Well, there's Ernie Pyle, of course, who was probably the most famous war correspondent.
Who did you say? I didn't hear the name.
Ernie Pyle,
Oh, Ernie Pyle.
but he was in Italy. I don't recall him ever being in Western Europe.
He was in Normandy, but
He
after,
was.
yeah, but he really talk about PTSD. He had it from his personal life and his war life. So after, I can't remember the exact date, July or August, he was at the liberation of Paris, actually. And sometime after that, he goes back to the States to deal with his personal problems, and of course ends up tragically dying in the Pacific. Yeah. So Ernie Pyle, who else?
Well, I knew Jack Thompson, who was the Chicago Tribune reporter that went in with the First Division on D-Day. And years later, I walked the beach with him at Omaha, and he was trying to remember where he went ashore, but he said, "I think it was over there," and we would go there. No, and I think it was over there, and he really wasn't able to pin down where he actually went ashore.
Yeah. When you're there, I've been there a couple of times. It's a big wide beach. It's hard to pinpoint exactly unless you have a GPS thing. Yeah, yeah.
Couple last questions here in the chat.
Oh, great. Please, yes.
From Al, I assume war correspondents had to have security clearance, or did they? If so, secret or above?
Say that again. I mean, the correspondence, yeah, of course they had to have accreditation. They had to have it to function within the framework of the military. Of course they did. And I think they carried the rank of captain, even though they were considered civilians. And as I said, the men got uniforms. The women had to have their own made. Of course, it's like hockey. You know, it's like that. So they definitely needed accreditation. And if you didn't have it, as I said, in the case of Martha Gellern, who lost it, life was much more difficult. No rations, no access. I mean, you really had to make your way in a different way if you didn't have accreditation.
And from Renee, if a writer were to write a short story about these neglected female journalists, what particular moment in history should every woman know about?
Who asked that question?
Renee.
Renee, thank you. It's a great question.
I need to hear it again.
So if a writer were to write a short story about these neglected female journalists, what particular moment in history should every woman know about?
Oh, gosh. You know, in some ways, I want to say the earliest moments because I think we, as I'd said before, we have this tendency to think the moment is all new because we don't know the history. So I might go back to Margaret Fuller. I think, you know, she achieved everything in journalism anybody would want to achieve and then dies at 40 tragically off Fire Island. She, her husband, and baby drown in a shipwreck. I mean, the story has everything. I might start there, 1840. It's also the time of Seneca Falls. It's, you know, it's a really important moment for women completely seeing their possibilities for the possibilities beyond church, home, family, and husband historically. So I would say there.
And one last one from Barb Smith. Russell, do you remember Dorothy Fuldheim of Cleveland?
I do not recognize the name.
Okay.
Who is she?
Brooke,
Uh,
does that name mean anything to you, Brooke?
Not to me.
So when I moved to the Cleveland area, maybe 40 years ago, she was always on Cleveland news broadcasts, and she was very old then. Yeah, she was a very special anchor, and I would imagine she had a very gloried past in journalism, and she certainly would have been big, I would have thought, in the 40s and 50s. So I just wanted to know if you may have come across her. Thank you.
Probably locally. She sounds like
Yes,
an important
yes,
local person.
right. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm always struck by people think that Barbara Walters is the first down the line for television, but it really is Pauline Frederick, who's years before and covered the United Nations when the United Nations mattered, and was a really important but very forgotten figure.
Just to throw my 2 cents in, I love reading about the Gilded Age. I was just trying to Google a couple of books that I just am not pulling into my head, but included in that is the story of Nellie Bly and Ida Turnbull and that whole genesis of investigative reporting in that time with, what was the name of the magazine again, Brooke?
McClure's.
McClure's, which is, I'm sure there's books just on that because that's a fascinating story in itself.
There are indeed.
Yeah. Okay, we have reached the witching hour. Brooke, it's been just fantastic to have you on and learn about these women. As always, we could go another hour or two, but not going to happen. Russell, thank you for coming on and adding your knowledge of journalism to the whole story. We really appreciate you being on.
Russell, you really impress me.
He's done the same for us for the last 2 or 3 years that we've known him. And
My most impressive thing is living to be 103. If I live 2 more years, I figure there will be only 10,000 of us left of World War II veterans.
yeah,
Fantastic. Fantastic.
You
Well,
know, one person that we should mention, not a woman, but Bill Walden, the cartoonist.
oh, right.
Bill
Yeah,
Mullen,
don't forget him.
yeah,
There you go.
which the leading authority in the United States, actually the world, is one Todd DePastina, who has written 2 books about Bill Mullen,
Walden, yeah.
who we are going to feature. Last ad, if you will, promotion. We will be featuring on our trip to Sicily and Italy in October of this year.
Wow.
So if you want to learn more about Bill Malden, come along with us with the absolute oracle on Bill Malden, Todd DePastino. And learn. He is a fascinating character. He and Ernie Pyle, and we've done programs on both. He and Ernie Pyle, are kind of hand in hand. One a correspondent and a journalist, the other what becomes out of nowhere a cartoonist. And the stories that they write, the stories that they tell, one in writing and one in pictures, are very similar in so many ways. So, okay, we need to say goodnight. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and thank all of
Absolutely.
you for being members. Todd,
Thank you, everyone.
Sean,
Good night,
thank you.
everybody. Take care.
You too.